So the gates burst open and monsters came flooding out like nightmares set loose. But hold up, don't you dare skip yet. Yeah. Humanity got wrecked, cities burned, heroes rose and fell. Sound familiar, right? But trust me, this one's different, and you're about to find out why. At this point in most stories, people usually awaken some cool power or get blessed with magic to fight off monsters. It's the classic setup. That's exactly what runs through the protagonist's mind as he stares at his phone, which oddly seems to be showing that same scenario. Then, out of nowhere, the screen bursts with a blinding light. He figures, of course, this is where he gets his powers too. But there's one big twist. Out of everyone in the world, he's the only one chosen. And to make things worse, he's supposed to handle an entire army of monsters by himself, as if his normal life and daily struggles weren't exhausting enough. Now he's apparently humanity's one-man defense team. To understand how things got so messed up, we have to rewind a bit. Bayan is as ordinary as they come, just a plain guy with no special skills or charm. His confidence is rock bottom, so loser might actually be the better description. Like most average people, he spends his free time reading webtoons. He's obsessed with a particular series he never misses and even checks out every new release that comes out. When he finds something good, he always leaves a comment to share his thoughts. Right now, he's completely absorbed in doing just that, so much so that he doesn't notice someone in front of him and ends up bumping straight into a classmate. His first reaction was to say sorry, but before he could, the girl snapped at him to watch where he was going. The funny part? She was also staring at her phone, yet somehow, he was the only one getting blamed. She shot him a disgusted glare, muttered something under her breath, and walked off like he didn't even exist. Sadly, this was the girl he secretly adored, had built an entire fantasy romance in his head where they were basically dating. She just hadn't been informed yet. His daydream ended abruptly when someone smacked the back of his head. It was a tall, muscular guy who looked like trouble, clearly annoyed by the goofy expression Bayan was making. And while hitting him was uncalled for, honestly, it was kind of understandable. His love-struck face was ridiculous. The guy barked at him to stop staring at the girl like a creep. He was the classic spoiled rich kid. And to make matters worse, Bayan's dad worked for his dad. Realizing he couldn't win here, Bayan mumbled an apology, thinking how the bullies in his favorite webtoons were nothing compared to this guy. Then, before anyone could blink, something insane happened. A monstrous figure appeared in the hallway. It wasn't human, not even close. Its presence alone was terrifying, and just meeting its gaze made Bayan's knees go weak. If 100 people couldn't take down a gorilla, what chance did they have against this demonic beast? His brain scrambled to make sense of it, and he could feel cold sweat, or maybe worse, running down his legs. The creature looked like a king ripped straight out of a fantasy epic, and bizarrely, Bayan felt a strange rush of excitement. Monsters like this usually showed up right before the hero did something epic. Maybe this was finally his moment. This guy seriously needed help, like actual therapy-level help. Instead of running for his life like a sane person, he was standing there expecting some heroic side character to swoop in and save him. If it were me, I'd have already broken the Olympic record for the 100-meter dash. But not him. Nope. His brain had clearly taken a vacation, and now he was convinced he'd soon awaken powers and get a magical girl partner straight out of an S-rank fantasy novel. Meanwhile, the rich jerk who'd smacked him earlier was already lying unconscious on the floor. The monster's first victim of the day. That's when something clicked in Bayan's head. This could be his big moment, the perfect chance to show off his main character energy and save even the guy who bullied him. The creature lunged again, smashing through walls like paper. And somehow, the student managed to dodge by pure luck. Bayan froze, his thoughts spinning faster than the chaos around him. Then, out of nowhere, a glowing blue screen popped up before his eyes. It was his system interface, just like in the games and webtoons he loved. "You have been chosen," it read. His heart pounded. This was it. The story had finally chosen him. The bully kept screaming for help, but Bayan simply held up a finger, saying, "Hang on, it'll save you after I finish awakening." The next message nearly made his jaw drop. Training begins now. Duration, 6,666 years. Complete the tower to gain divine power and become humanity's savior. His mouth fell open, and before he could say a word, the world around him vanished in blinding light. But the boy wasn't interested in reading a wall of text. He just wanted the cool powers now. While he squinted at the glowing blue window, the rich kid was out there doing his best impression of a chew toy for the monster. The system, apparently realizing it was dealing with someone impatient, rephrased the message in the simplest way possible. "Do you want to climb a giant tower for the next 66,666 years and become super overpowered?" The boy didn't even hesitate. "Yes. Obviously yes," he shouted, already imagining himself wielding flaming swords and summoning dragons. The system then told him to pick one skill to start with, but instead of deciding quickly, he froze. There were too many possibilities: magic, weapons, divine items, and every second he spent thinking was another second the rich kid spent screaming. The system sweetened the deal, explaining that he could choose anything. He could command armies, forge the mightiest weapon, or gain a power that could save entire worlds. As long as you can imagine it, it's possible, the system declared. But then came the catch. The Tower of Trials wasn't some game. It had more than 60,000 floors, and He'd have only 1 year to reach the top. If he failed, He'd die for real. The weight of that hit him, but instead of panicking, he started overthinking everything. Should he pick a legendary weapon? A god-tier ability? Or maybe something creative that no one else would think of? While he pondered every possible choice like it was a school exam, the monster roared again, and the rich kid's screams got louder. By now, the rich kid was practically bawling, begging the protagonist to keep his promise and save him already. But our guy just waved him off, saying, "Hold on, almost done," his eyes glued to the glowing system window. Finally, he tapped the screen with the confidence of a man about to change history. The system waited, ready to record his choice. Then, with all the drama of a movie hero about to reveal his ultimate move, he said, "I choose a ticket that takes me straight to the top floor of the Tower of Trials." The world froze for a second. Even a monster stopped mid-growl, like it couldn't believe what it just heard. The system itself glitched in confusion, flashing warnings and question marks everywhere. That's not how this works," it stammered. The boy simply smirked and reminded it of its own rules. "You may choose any item or skill imaginable. And this," he said proudly, "is what I imagined." The system went silent for a moment, as if having a full existential crisis. "You're bending reality," it protested. "No," the boy replied. "I'm just following the instructions." After a long digital sigh, the system gave in and granted his absurd request. The glowing ticket materialized in his hand, shining like a cheat code come to life. "Congratulations," the system finally said, sounding defeated. "Upon arrival on the final floor, you will receive all endgame rewards." The boy grinned. "Perfect," he said, just before his body began to dissolve into light. The system then asked if he wanted to activate the item right away, and without thinking twice, the boy shouted, "Yes." The ticket in his hand began to shine, growing brighter and brighter until the entire hallway was swallowed by light. The glow became so blinding that even the monster stopped its rampage, confused by what was happening, while the terrified rich kid shielded his eyes in disbelief. The boy's entire body began to dissolve into radiant energy, his form glowing like molten gold. For a moment, the whole school seemed to pulse with divine light, and if anyone had been watching from space, Earth would have looked like a newborn star. When the brightness faded, the boy blinked at his now empty hands, wondering if it had actually worked. That's when the system's cheerful voice echoed, congratulating him for reaching the final floor of the Tower of Trials. His reward? Complete transcendence. One by one, notifications exploded in the air like fireworks. SSS-level abilities unlocked, all stats maxed out, human limits surpassed. A rush of power coursed through his veins, and his body reappeared in the school hallway, glowing even brighter than before. The once scrawny loser had transformed into something otherworldly. Energy rippled from him in waves, shaking the ground beneath his feet. The monstrous creature that had terrified everyone moments ago froze, realizing the predator-prey dynamic had flipped. The rich kid gawked, barely recognizing the radiant figure standing before him. The boy glanced at the creature with a grin, cracking his knuckles as arcs of power danced around him. "Well," he said, his voice calm but commanding, "you gonna just stand there trembling, or are we doing this?" The monster whimpered, darting a pleading look toward the rich kid, who quickly pointed at the glowing figure and said, "He's the one you want." That was when the creature remembered its one true purpose: to destroy everything in its path. With a snarl, it lunged at the boy, confident its power would crush him. But to the newly awakened protagonist, the attack looked like it was moving in slow motion, almost lazy. He figured this was the perfect time to test his newfound strength, so he raised his hand and casually flicked his fingers. In that instant, reality itself seemed to shatter. A blinding explosion of light consumed the entire hallway, the air trembling as if a miniature sun had just been born. The shockwave ripped through the school, disintegrating everything in its path. What followed wasn't just destruction, it was erasure. The sheer force of the blast tore through the atmosphere and shot straight into outer space, leaving a searing beam of energy that cut across the stars. The planet quaked from the sheer magnitude, and the creature that started it all was erased so completely that not even dust remained. When the light finally dimmed, the boy stood at the center of it all, stunned at what his single flick had done. The school, the city, maybe even the moon, it was all a blur. The system's voice returned, cheerful and mechanical. breaking the silence. Calculating results. Congratulations! You have shattered multiple dimensional and power records. Extra rewards unlocked. The boy blinked, realizing his casual request for a simple shortcut had turned into a world-ending cheat code. The system calmly announced that his last attack had a total of 2 billion casualties. The rich kid, still alive by sheer luck, stared at the boy in horror, realizing the real monster wasn't the creature, but the human standing before him. Trembling, he asked what on earth had just happened, but Bayan waved it off, saying he was being too dramatic. Then, with a deep breath, Bayan decided to fix his colossal mistake by using one of the many absurd abilities Head gained, an SSS level time reversal spell. He focused his thoughts, channeling immense power as the world around him began to rewind. Buildings reassembled, shattered glass flowed backward, and the explosion's energy returned to his fingertips. Even the sky seemed to spin in reverse as the flow of time bent to his will. Every life lost, every broken piece, was being restored as reality itself twisted to obey him. He watched the scenes flash by until everything snapped back to the exact moment before he flicked his fingers at the monster. Now he stood face to face with it again, sweat trickling down his cheek as the beast trembled in fear. He finally understood how dangerous his strength had become. Placing a hand on his head, he sighed with relief, muttering an apology to the terrified creature for losing control earlier. "Sorry," he said with an awkward grin. "It's my first time handling this much power." As he thought about how much power he had gained, the poor creature tried to sneak away through the hole in the wall, but the boy quickly stopped it with a binding spell, asking where it thought it was going. He didn't feel like wasting time fighting the same monster again, so he decided to handle it differently. With a grin, he activated one of his countless overpowered SSS rank skills, Dimensional Exile, instantly sending the beast screaming into another world. Watching it vanish, the once arrogant bully dropped to his knees in awe, stammering that Bayan's power was unbelievable. But Bayan casually waved it off, saying he hadn't actually defeated the creature, just temporarily relocated it somewhere else. The bully, trembling and wide-eyed, suddenly lowered his head in respect, calling Bayan a true hero. Caught off guard by the sudden change in attitude, Bayan blinked in confusion as the bully panicked and quickly added that Bayan had saved his life, making him his savior. Then Bayan turned toward the rich kid and reminded him that he was supposed to go buy some bread earlier. The boy instantly panicked, saying he'd go himself this time and started apologizing nonstop, clearly terrified. But our protagonist wasn't done yet. Bayan told him to stay, but since there was still something he needed to handle. Outside the school, chaos had taken over. The city was crawling with monsters tearing everything apart. Seeing the destruction, the rich kid's bravado vanished, replaced by pure fear. He fell to his knees and begged the protagonist to do something, but the boy just told him to wait since he had priorities. The rich kid shouted that saving the students should come first, but our protagonist calmly replied that his family's safety came before anyone else's, which, surprisingly, the rich kid found completely fair. Without another word, Bayan activated an A-rank teleportation skill, vanishing in a flash of light. Meanwhile, far away, a man was dozing peacefully on a soft bed, enjoying a perfect afternoon nap so deep that even the end of the world wouldn't be enough to wake him. That peaceful scene on TV was what our protagonist's parents were watching. His mom was amazed by how tidy a man's room could be, while his dad sighed, wishing he could be the one lying there, enjoying such a calm nap. But their quiet moment ended abruptly when the broadcast was cut off by a sudden emergency alert. The news reported that monsters were attacking the capital of Korea, urging everyone to stay inside and prepare for the worst. Panic filled their faces as the phone on the table started ringing nonstop. Curious and frightened, they rushed to the window and froze. The city outside was in chaos, burning and crumbling under the rampage of monstrous creatures. It was a nightmare made real. Then, one of those beasts noticed them staring and turned its rage toward their apartment, ready to smash it to pieces. Just before the strike landed, their son appeared behind the monster, calmly asking what it thought it was doing. With a simple gesture, Bayan activated his gravity inversion power, locking his gaze on the creature as the spell took effect. The monster's body began to rise uncontrollably, soaring upward like it had fallen in reverse, leaving his parents unharmed. They were safe, but completely stunned. Their son floated outside the window, glowing with power, and when he passed through the glass as if it weren't even there, they realized in disbelief that the person saving them was truly their own child. Even though the danger had passed, his parents were still in shock, unable to process everything unfolding before their eyes. Bayan's dad, trying to make sense of the moment, blurted out the most normal question possible. Why wasn't he at school? And since when was it okay to walk inside with shoes on? Our boy sighed, saying those things didn't matter right now, but his parents clearly disagreed. Chaos or not, skipping school and ignoring house rules were still unacceptable. Realizing they wouldn't drop it, Bayan quietly removed his shoes, admitting that they had worked tirelessly to raise him over the last 16 years. Bayan confessed that had been glued to his phone day and night, and he knew how much that must have worried them. But now, he told them proudly, they no longer had to worry, had been chosen as humanity's savior. That announcement, however, only made his parents more alarmed, wondering if their son had finally lost his mind from reading too much nonsense. Yet the boy wasn't joking. Bayan explained that in every story he had ever admired, the main character always faced everything alone, fighting monsters, saving worlds, carrying burdens no one else could see. But those heroes always forgot something important, their families. And unlike them, Bayan refused to make that mistake. With a warm smile, he stretched out his hands, channeling his new powers to bless his parents with incredible abilities, ensuring they would always be safe no matter what happened next. Even after hearing his son's entire speech, the boy's father, being the old-fashioned man he was, still asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. But our protagonist meant every word. Protecting his family came before anything else. With a wave of his hand, Bayan cast a massive defensive spell that covered the entire neighborhood in an invisible barrier, strong enough to stop even the strongest monsters. That should keep his parents completely safe. Finally, Bayan could focus on saving the rest of the world. But before he could leave, his parents shouted again, demanding to know what on earth was going on. Smiling softly, he told them he loved them both very much before his body began to glow once again, filling the room with a blinding light. His parents, unsure of what was happening, could only whisper that they loved him too. Outside, the city lay in ruins, and our protagonist reappeared near the school. The rich kid, now acting overly polite, nervously asked if his parents were safe. Bayan nodded, which made his former bully breathe a huge sigh of relief. But then, with a teasing grin, our protagonist brought up the bread again, apologizing for mentioning it, but admitting he just couldn't help himself. As a former victim, Bayan knew what it was like to be humiliated, and now it was his turn to teach a lesson. Raising his hand, Bayan began chanting a powerful summoning spell, the air around him trembling as the terrified rich kid realized this was not going to end well. With a chilling grin and eyes that screamed madness, he asked the rich kid if he really liked burgers, because from now on, he was going to eat them until he couldn't move. In an instant, hundreds of hamburgers materialized out of thin air, piling up like an avalanche and burying the terrified bully beneath them. The poor guy struggled to dig his way out, gasping for breath as greasy buns surrounded him on all sides. Once he finally stood up, trembling, our protagonist simply stared at him with disappointment. Bayan couldn't believe how weak the guy actually was. It was almost pathetic. The rich kid, shaking, asked if all this was really necessary, insisting he hadn't done anything that terrible. But our boy only smirked darker, saying he hadn't even started yet. With a snap of his fingers, he projected a flashback into the air, showing the bully's cruel acts one by one. The rich kid's eyes widened as the memories replayed. The time he mocked the protagonist in front of everyone. The day he set fire to his school uniform. Even the moment he forced him to eat his lunch after dunking it in a filthy toilet. Each scene played like a nightmare, and our boy's voice trembled with the weight of those memories. Day after day, he had swallowed humiliation and pain, powerless to do anything. Until now. There was even a time when his glasses were locked with a padlock, and somehow, the bully didn't remember any of it. He admitted to telling the boy to go buy bread, but claimed the rest sounded made up, especially since the protagonist didn't even wear glasses anymore. Narrowing his eyes, Bayan asked if he was calling him a liar, his voice low and dangerous. Surprisingly, the bully stood his ground and said he really couldn't remember. That was enough for our protagonist. With a calm smile, Bayan said he'd forgive him and even offer a gift to mark their newfound friendship. When asked what he wanted most, the bully said he wanted a body built purely from juice, strong and flawless. That answer made our protagonist's grin widen. With a snap, a swirling green mist surrounded the bully, his body twisting and glowing inside it. When the fog cleared, the muscular dream was gone. Instead, a massive hamburger sat where the bully once stood. The boy screamed in outrage, his tiny sesame seed mouth trembling, while our protagonist doubled over laughing. Bayan told the little burger that if he truly felt sorry, maybe he'd consider turning him back. But before the hamburger could respond, a sharp female voice echoed down the hall. It was her, the same girl who once looked at him like he was trash. And the moment he saw her, he instantly knew who had arrived. Bayan proudly told her that he had been chosen by the gods themselves, while the small hamburger beside him kept squealing for mercy, begging to be human again. The girl's face turned pale when she realized the burger was talking. With a mischievous grin, our protagonist said it was adorable and even offered her a bite, which made her freeze in pure horror. Clutching her chest, she asked if he wasn't scared at all, because the world outside was falling apart. Monsters roaming everywhere, people missing, and the entire school eerily empty. The phones were dead, no police were answering, and she couldn't even tell if her family was safe. Her trembling voice cracked as she spoke, tears welling in her eyes. But instead of panicking, our protagonist just tilted his head and asked if she had ever read a story before. Stories were fun, Bayan said, and besides, the reason nobody else was around was simple. The author was lazy and didn't feel like drawing more side characters. Oddly enough, that sounded logical to him, but she looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Seeing her confusion only made Bayan sigh dramatically, realizing she had no sense of narrative flair or imagination. Grabbing his head in frustration, Bayan groaned like a playwright disappointed by his own audience. The talking sandwich nervously suggested that maybe it was time to fix everything, but our protagonist had a better idea. Why not summon a proper female lead instead? With that thought, Bayan activated his SSS tier summoning skill, one powerful enough to reach across every known dimension. A massive glowing circle appeared on the ground, pulsing with divine energy. The girl beside him screamed in terror, having absolutely no clue what was happening. Calmly, he requested the most beautiful, enchanting woman in existence. The spell's brilliance was so blinding that even the monsters outside had to shield their eyes. As the magic faded, a dense fog filled the corridor, and from within it emerged a shadowy silhouette. The sandwich stuttered, asking what kind of madness Bayan had unleashed this time. Cold sweat ran down our protagonist's back as he finally saw her clearly. A breathtaking woman, elegant yet deadly, clutching a sword dripping with blood. Her beauty was mesmerizing, but her eyes radiated danger. A stranger had materialized inside the school, and she looked like she had just walked out of a violent battle. Our protagonist stood frozen, unsure of what to say, while the sandwich fell instantly in love. The mysterious woman, still dazed, murmured that she had just killed someone named Germiane with her own hands. She looked like the kind of heroine straight out of a romance novel. The type who charms a ruthless tyrant, takes his throne, and becomes the villain herself. The moment she appeared, she acted all regal and proud, clearly expecting people to tremble before her. But our protagonist, being his usual unbothered self, greeted her like he was talking to a random NPC. That alone shocked her. It was the first time anyone had dared treat the heir of House Libershan so casually. Before she could launch into her royal introduction, our boy cut her off mid-sentence, saying she couldn't just switch genres halfway through the story. He reminded her that the first 3 chapters of any webtoon were critical for hooking readers, and right now, they were literally in chapter 3. If she started narrating her tragic noble backstory, they'd be stuck in that hallway for 10 more episodes, and the readers would definitely start complaining about the pacing. Completely ignoring him, she kept rambling about her world and her noble bloodline, which irritated our protagonist even more. Then she had the nerve to call him rude for raising his voice at her, even though they had just met. The boy wasn't exactly an expert in fantasy romance tropes, and meanwhile, the silver-haired girl looked around, utterly lost, wondering where she had ended up and why the other girl was dressed so strangely. Just seconds ago, she could have sworn she was passionately driving her dagger into her husband's chest. But with a lazy flick of his fingers, our protagonist made the blood-stained blade vanish into thin air. He even joked that he could make her outfit disappear too if she wanted a new look, leaving her absolutely flawless in appearance. Both the terrified girl and the human hamburger gawked in disbelief, completely lost for words. The silver-haired newcomer, however, demanded to know who this strange man was, but before she could finish, he stopped listening entirely. His instinct screamed that something dangerous was closing in. Instantly, he summoned a shimmering barrier that engulfed the school just in time to block a devastating blow. While everyone else argued or panicked, a monstrous creature, towering over the building, had crept up and was now roaring furiously, shaking the ground beneath them. The silver-haired girl looked utterly bewildered, unable to even grasp what kind of bizarre world she had fallen into. From inside the glowing barrier, our protagonist calmly watched the beast's relentless attacks, each strike more desperate than the last. After a few seconds of observation, by inside, it was clear the monster wasn't just ugly. It was also profoundly stupid. A perfect warm-up opponent. With the system's assistance, he began fine-tuning his strength, determined not to accidentally erase the planet again. Channeling one of his countless abilities, our protagonist charged a surge of electricity in his palm, ready to deliver a thunderous strike that would end the monster in an instant. The blast cracked through the air like divine judgment, showing the creature just how insignificant it truly was before his overwhelming power. The girls watching could only stare in shock and awe. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a scene straight out of legend. But for Bayan, it was just another casual moment. As long as it entertained him, that was enough. Switching things up, Bayan decided to unleash a storm of ice magic next, and with just a flick of his wrist, every monster nearby froze solid where they stood. Their bodies became glimmering sculptures of fear, silent and motionless. With a satisfied smirk, he stomped down, shattering them into glittering shards that scattered through the city like a deadly snowfall. The street turned into a field of destruction, a frozen graveyard glistening under the sun. Realizing he might have gone a little overboard, Bayan sighed and dialed his power down, just a bit. Even with restraint, the aftermath was absolute chaos. Still, the thrill of knowing his own strength brought a wild grin to his face. Just then, the system screen popped up, congratulating Bayan on defeating his first official enemy. But before Bayan could even celebrate, the air around him began to ripple as dozens more monsters materialized. A mix of fantasy beasts and awakened world horrors. It was exactly the kind of crossover chaos had been waiting for. Among his many overpowered tricks, flying was one of his favorites, and Bayan wasted no time soaring into the sky to face the monsters head-on. In his hand, Bayan formed a glowing blade of pure psionic energy that hummed with lethal force. With lightning speed, Bayan tore through the horde, slicing creatures apart as if they were made of paper, their bodies and limbs raining down below like confetti in a nightmare parade. Every swing painted the air with chaos as he moved straight toward the largest threat, a massive, menacing dragon that blotted out the clouds. Yet, even that towering beast was nothing compared to his overwhelming strength. While dodging fire and claws, Bayan noticed all the monsters were crawling out from a single swirling portal. Fixing his eyes on it, Bayan realized there was no need to waste time. Sure, he could jump in and destroy everything from the inside like a hero, but that wasn't his style. Instead, Bayan used one of his most broken abilities, dimensional banishment. Why fight when you could delete the problem from reality itself? The moment his power activated, the monsters froze mid-roar, their instincts screaming in terror. The air around them warped as the entire portal began to collapse inward, swallowed by an even greater void tearing open in the sky. A thunderous silence followed as the rift vanished completely, leaving behind only calm winds and drifting dust. Breathing out, Bayan looked down at the now safe city and smiled in quiet satisfaction. Crisis handled, no sweat. With a flick of his wrist, Bayan teleported back to the school, ready to see what kind of mess awaited him next. When Bayan returned to the hallway, he found the two girls chatting casually with a human hamburger, as if nothing weird had happened. The silver-haired girl, whose name now revealed to be Yahello, noticed him and said that while he was gone, she had learned a lot about this strange world. Apparently, she had somehow traveled through time into the future. Everything here was completely different from what she knew. Bayan explained that she hadn't really time-traveled, but had simply ended up in another timeline, and he could help her fit in using his transformation powers. His real goal, though, was to give her a new outfit, mostly to save the poor illustrator from dying of exhaustion after all those flashy fight scenes. A warm glow surrounded Yahello as her outfit changed, and she couldn't help but blush at the sudden transformation. The human hamburger nearly fainted from excitement. Flustered, Yahello begged for a proper dress, claiming the new outfit was way too revealing. Bayan even tied her hair to make the design look cleaner. Watching all this, the other girl named Jo-eun crossed her arms with a disgusted look, saying she never thought she'd meet someone with such questionable fashion sense. Bayan told her not to use such harsh words, insisting he had picked something practical and comfy, though he did admit the shorts might have been a little too short. Just as he was about to change her outfit again, the human hamburger desperately begged him not to, but Bayan ignored him. In the next moment, Yahello was now wearing proper pants, much to the sandwich's horror. Trying to take advantage of the situation, Jo-eun asked if he could make designer clothes for her too, shocking Bayan, who never expected her to be that type. While they chatted, Yahello randomly mentioned that her last name wasn't Yahello Libershan anymore. It was Yahello Kleshwak, a noble title she earned after becoming princess. Bayan barely heard her, too distracted by how her hair shimmered under the light. Then Yahello began hinting about her tragic past, how she had killed her own husband and destroyed her future. Bayan quickly cut her off, saying he didn't need her life story since none of it made sense anyway. Even so, for the first time, he actually felt sympathy for her. Guessing she might be terminally ill, Bayan said it out loud, which shocked Yahello completely, because somehow he was right. And that wasn't even the most surprising part. Yahellow's marriage had clearly been forced upon her, tied to a man she never cared for, and it seemed he had betrayed her with one of the maids. Blamed for something Yahello never did. She was painted as the villain in a story full of lies. During that chaos, an unexpected tragedy struck. With tears streaming down her face, Yahello confessed it was all true. Bayan could tell she had been through unbearable pain, but he reminded her that she didn't need to hold on to that suffering anymore. When Yahello struggled to accept his words, he calmly assured her that what she did was only to protect herself. Then, with a touch of his hand, he granted her body an S-rank blessing, declaring that she was innocent. A soothing warmth spread through Yahello as Bayan told her that every illness she carried had been erased. She was completely healed. For the first time, Yahello could finally live freely in this new world. It was something no one had ever given her. Not her powerful father, not her trusted friend, and definitely not her awful fiancé. Yet now, this man she had just met had given her what she had always longed for. As the heroine of a strange, unpredictable romance, she wasn't just thankful. She was clearly drawn to him. And before Bayan could process her feelings, the system window popped up, announcing his monster kill count and unlocking a brand new achievement. That moment marked the true beginning of his journey. The system announced that Bayan had drawn the attention of countless constellations, powerful celestial beings watching from beyond. By impressing them, he could gain new powers, divine blessings, and rare treasures. But as the flood of notifications filled his vision, Bayan felt more annoyed than excited. Dozens of constellations were trying to win him over, yet he couldn't care less. Bayan ordered the system to block them all. Shocked, the system questioned why he had turned down such golden opportunities, but Bayan just shrugged, saying he wasn't into cosmic sponsorships or celestial fan clubs. The system tried to argue, but he simply ignored it and turned to his group instead, asking if they wanted to join him in saving the world. Meanwhile, far beyond the stars, the Celestial Council gathered. Dozens of divine entities observed the boy's defiance. One of them, the embodiment of wrath, roared in anger. A mere mortal had dared to reject his blessing. Another, the constellation of games, chuckled in amusement, saying this human might just make things interesting. At that same time, the constellation of cuisine declared it was about time someone humbled the boy. But before chaos could break out, a radiant figure wearing a crown raised his hand, telling everyone to stay calm. He was the king of constellations. Despite Bayan being just a human, the king said the boy had conquered the Tower of Trials and therefore deserved their respect. The constellation of despair scoffed, claiming such a thing was impossible for a mere mortal. Envy, on the other hand, hissed that the boy had broken every rule, skipping all the proper stages. He demanded Bayan be summoned to their realm immediately so they could test whether this human truly had the power to shake the balance of the universe. And if he did, Envy himself would erase him. Back on Earth, Bayan distributed a portion of his power among his team, allowing them to crush the monsters however they liked. The only exception was the human hamburger, who whined in jealousy. The girls weren't thrilled either. They had no desire to fight those nightmare creatures. Seeing their fear, Bayan smiled and said they were his companions, protected by the ultimate shield, the plot itself. Nothing bad could happen to them. Joe Uni pointed out that he could easily handle everything alone, but he laughed and said that doing everything solo was just boring. Right then, a monster tried to sneak up on him. But before it could even touch him, it exploded into dust against his invisible barrier. The stronger the main hero becomes, the more exciting the side characters' stories get, or so Bayan claimed. Joe Uni blinked in confusion, but Yahello seemed to understand what he meant. She calmly asked if destroying every monster was truly the only way to save this world. After all, Yahello had already taken her husband's life, a man destined to be king. That thought alone made the others uneasy. Then, without hesitation, Yahello faced the nearest monster and struck. Bayan smirked. This was perfect for his story. Step 1. Build a team. And her role was now clear. Tapping into the darkness she carried, Yahello unleashed a storm of attacks, slicing the giant beast into chunks. It felt disturbingly liberating. On any man, that wild look in her eyes would seem insane. Bayan proudly dubbed her the Dagger Assassin. Joe Unyi, trembling, whispered that Yahello was terrifying, but Bayan only smiled, thrilled that his story already had such a strong character. Lost in thought, The assassin didn't notice another creature sneaking up behind her until it wrapped her in its slimy tentacles. The tension spiked. The human sandwich panicked while Joe Unyi yelled for someone to help. Without thinking, the sandwich charged in to rescue her, and Bayan laughed, cheering him on and calling him the Burger Bang. This marked the rise of another character in Bayan's ridiculous story. His eyes gleamed with the fiery sparkle of a guy who instantly fell for any cute girl. Charging forward with his bread-like body, the Burger Bang smacked the monster with surprising force. Still, deep down, he hated being treated like the comic relief, the team's mascot. Grumbling, he turned to Bayan and demanded a cooler ability, something worthy of a hero. The dagger assassin, however, thanked him sincerely, which made the poor sandwich melt on the spot. Flashing a shy grin, he promised her that he'd do anything for her. Meanwhile, only one member hadn't shown her powers yet, Jo Eunyi. Trembling, she admitted she didn't understand why she was even there. To keep things moving, Bayan encouraged her to reveal whatever ability she'd been granted. But she refused, shaking her head. Jo Eunyi insisted that Bayan, who could supposedly turn back time and had been chosen by the gods, should be the one fixing everything instead. As she spoke, the reality of their situation grew darker. The city outside was in ruins, lives were being lost, and the fragile world around them was on the edge of complete collapse. Fun shouldn't matter that much, Jo Eunyi argued, but Bayan completely disagreed. Fun, he said, was the most important thing in the world. Without it, there's no point in living at all. Jo Eunyi sighed, deciding not to argue further, while Bayan confidently declared that one day she'd understand the truth behind his words, because in this new world, fun was the ultimate rule. Suddenly, the mood shifted as Bayan's expression grew serious. He told Jo Eunyi to look behind her. A massive monster was rushing toward them. He urged her to use the magic granted to her, but Jo Eunyi had no idea what she was doing. Closing her eyes, she gripped her staff and swung it wildly like a baseball bat, smacking the monster straight across the face. Everyone froze for a moment, shocked by the brutal yet oddly perfect swing. The creature exploded into a pile of goo, which made her recoil in disgust as she muttered that she was supposed to be the strong one. Burger Bang cheered, saying Jo Eunyi's form was perfect for baseball, and she shyly admitted she used to play when she was younger. Bayan hadn't expected her to turn into a slugger-type character, but before he could comment further, a strange chill crept up his spine. Something powerful was standing right behind him, demanding his full attention. The energy radiating from that presence wasn't anything a normal monster could produce. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, his voice calm, but commanding, saying he was impressed that Bayan had managed to interfere with his power using nothing but his bare hands. That statement alone made Bayan's eyes widen. There was only one person who could say something like that. While the stranger marveled at finding someone so strong in this world, Bayan could barely contain his excitement. The mysterious man was confused by the boy's reaction, especially when Bayan suddenly blurted out that he was his biggest fan and couldn't believe he was actually real. The girl stared at him, bewildered, asking who this man even was. Grinning, Bayan broke the fourth wall again, telling them, and the audience, to look up a story called Kianma, where the main character was a legendary martial arts master and one of the greatest villains ever written. The mysterious man furrowed his brows and told him he talked too much, asking if that massive blast of energy from the east was his doing. Bayan froze for a second before nervously laughing. He had almost forgotten about that little finger flick that sent a shockwave halfway across the world. Bayan nodded and admitted that, yes, the giant shockwave was his doing. The man, known as 1,000 Demons, chuckled darkly and said humanity had grown soft, losing its edge and spark. Even he had grown bored of this dull, lifeless world. But recently, something had changed. Monsters were popping up all over the place, and the chaos was making him feel alive again. For the first time in ages, he was actually enjoying himself, ready to give in completely to that thrill. But then, out of nowhere, a blinding burst of energy tore across the land, heading straight for him. It was so strong that he had no choice but to summon his strongest barrier. The energy slammed into him like a meteor, ripping apart everything in its path. Yet somehow he remained standing. When he turned around, his jaw dropped. Time itself was rewinding. Everything that had been destroyed was rebuilding before his eyes, like reality was being stitched back together. Only a being of unimaginable power could pull that off, and his instinct screamed for him to chase that energy to its source. He flew across oceans, following the pulse until he found Bayan, the boy responsible. But soon, he realized Bayan had only been listening to his dramatic backstory because he was a martial arts fan. When it came to romance arcs, especially the best friends one, he skipped them faster than lightning. Honestly, I can't even blame him for that. Zhou Yunyi asked how someone from China could speak fluent Korean, and our protagonist told her to use her brain a little, reminding her that logic doesn't exist in this story's universe. Meanwhile, 1,000 demons finally stood before the unknown master he had been chasing and declared that he would kill him, eager for a thrilling duel. But instead of fear, the boy's face was lit up with pure fanboy excitement. Bayan couldn't believe his martial arts idol was right in front of him. 1,000 demons smirked, thrilled by the thought of a deadly match, while the rest of the team felt bad for the guy, clueless about the chaotic powerhouse he was challenging. Without warning, the martial master unleashed his celestial demonic dragon palm, a colossal strike that tore the ground apart and engulfed the battlefield in smoke and fire. But when the dust cleared, our protagonist stood unharmed, yawning as he said the attack was too slow. That stunned 8,000 demons, who hadn't expected the boy to dodge so casually. Grinning, Bayan said Head always wanted to pull that off, vanishing mid-blast just to reappear behind his opponent and talk trash. He bragged about gaining his strength through awakening, then asked how the old martial legend got so powerful, completely forgetting they were still fighting. After a moment of silence, 1,000 demons sighed, saying Head lost interest in this battle and politely excused himself from the fight. He decided to move on with his life, hunting the monsters that kept showing up on Earth. As he walked away from the group, he muttered that the whole thing had been a total waste of time, though the team's mascot teased that he was just running off after realizing his attacks didn't work. 1,000 demons snapped back, saying this place had no future anyway. That's when Bayan's smile faded. He calmly placed a hand on the man's shoulder and told him to watch his words when talking about his world. Instantly, 1,000 demons jerked back in shock. How did this kid get that close without him noticing? His instincts screamed danger. Realizing the boy wasn't normal, he decided to end the threat right there. With a flick of his wrist, he unleashed a deadly blast that ripped through the air toward the protagonist. But instead of panic, Bayan simply watched, unimpressed, as if someone had set off cheap fireworks at a local festival. The attack's energy tore up the ground, and massive chunks of stone flew straight at him. Just before the biggest one could hit, Bayan casually reached out and caught it with his bare hand. A blinding explosion followed, engulfed in a swirling dark aura pouring from 8,000 demons, shaking the battlefield like a storm ready to erase everything. The beautifully drawn and surprisingly well-fed girls watched in panic, worried Bayan might not have survived that devastating attack. The demonic art of 1,000 demons was so strong it could tear apart reality itself. But from that swirling chaos, Bayan stepped out grinning, stretching like Head just taken the best cold shower of his life. 1,000 demons froze in disbelief, while Bayan laughed, saying even though the guy was terrifying, he was still insanely cool. It was obvious. Our protagonist was starstruck by his favorite character and, without hesitation, asked him to join his party, ruining the tension completely. Meanwhile, 1,000 demons stood there, stunned that the move Head spent centuries perfecting had done absolutely nothing. His disbelief turned to rage as he shouted that he was the mightiest being beneath the heavens and would never lose to some brat. Hearing that, Bayan frowned, feeling personally attacked, and came up with something hilarious to do next. Bayan lifted one hand and began gathering his energy, instantly catching his opponent's attention. The human sandwich could already sense what was about to happen. It was Bayan's transmogrification ability, and soon, 1,000 demons' bodies started glowing with a strange green mist, signaling that things were about to get very weird. Trying to figure out what just happened, the man felt something strange, like his body wasn't quite right, and then he heard his own voice and froze. It was higher, much higher. Something was definitely off. The entire team stared in disbelief as they realized what Bayan had done. With a proud grin, Bayan announced that 1,000 demons was no longer the strongest man under the heavens, but the most powerful woman under the heavens. The newly transformed warrior blinked in utter confusion, while the boy's female companions were horrified. Zhou Yunyi in the group looked especially disgusted, glaring at Bayan as he awkwardly tried to justify himself, claiming that gender swap jokes used to be a top-tier comedy move, even if they were kind of outdated now. Zhou Yunyi started lecturing him about gender sensitivity and respect, but he quickly cut her off mid-sentence, saying her dialogue limit was 3 lines max. Before he could relax, the newly made woman demanded to be changed back immediately. But instead of listening, Bayan just flicked her on the forehead, stopping any attempt at rebellion and leaving the entire scene spiraling further into chaotic absurdity. Bayan told her it's been ages since someone dared to talk back after getting flicked like that, warning that if she kept acting up, she'd earn another one. His team stood there frozen, shocked by how casually he handled the situation, while the sandwich guy just sighed, wishing he could go back to his normal life instead of witnessing this madness. After disciplining his newly transformed companion, Bayan proudly declared that his squad was finally complete. Kyanma, the martial arts legend turned accidental woman, clearly wanted to revert, but that dream was going nowhere. Completely ignoring everyone's complaints, Bayan told his new crew to start wiping out the monsters around him. Head let them handle the hard work while he teleported elsewhere, explaining that he had more important things to do, like saving the entire planet. And so, a bizarre new party was left behind, people who barely knew each other and trusted each other even less. Meanwhile, across the ocean, chaos was spreading fast. Inside the White House, the President of the United States sat in a tense emergency meeting, surrounded by military brass and top advisors. They needed a plan, something drastic. Yet the only thing the president could think about was the nuclear option, even though launching it meant turning their own land into ashes. The Secretary of Defense looked completely defeated, but he couldn't argue. No matter what kind of weapon they used, guns, missiles, fighter jets, or even chemical bombs, none of it mattered. As long as those spatial rifts stayed open, the monsters kept pouring out endlessly. The president, red with frustration, slammed the table and admitted they were out of options. If only, he said, they could destroy the rifts themselves. That's when, out of nowhere, Bayan casually appeared in the middle of the meeting room, hands in pockets, grinning. I can fix that. He said like it was no big deal. Strangely, nobody even screamed. The world had gotten so weird that random teleporting teenagers didn't faze anyone anymore. The president, used to chaos by now, just asked who the kid was. With a confident smile, Bayan introduced himself as the pervert of Korea, age 17, and future savior of the world. A heavy silence swallowed the entire room. The Secret Service immediately drew their guns, shouting orders, while our protagonist raised his hands and calmly said, "Relax, someone's gonna get hurt if you keep waving those around." The president just sighed. Clearly, this day couldn't get any stranger. The Secretary of Defense snapped that the kid had just appeared out of nowhere and might be a monster, so they needed to act fast, but the president told them to hold on. Before anyone could calm down, a guard opened fire. He emptied nearly his entire magazine, convinced the boy was a threat, only to watch in stunned silence as every bullet clattered harmlessly to the floor. Bayan had conjured a real, physical bulletproof barrier, like a famous movie scene come to life, and he was grinning because it was, frankly, hilarious to toy with such power. After letting the spent rounds fall, Bayan turned to the president and asked if he finally understood. If so, the man should trust him completely. With the room's attention squarely on Bayan, Bayan told the president to launch every nuclear weapon they had. That suggestion was extreme, and the president hesitated, needing more than bravado to justify such a move. Bayan skipped the talk and used a mass manipulation skill, reaching out and bending the room's officials to his will. The normally stiff generals and aides went blank-faced, obeying like puppets. One of the controlled men grabbed the desk phone, and under that influence the president's hand dialed the military code, the Neo-Doomsday Protocol. The order was sent. All nuclear arsenals would be launched immediately. The order raced down the chain of command and terrified the officers who had to carry it out. There really seemed no choice but to obey. Submarines launched the first nuclear missiles, and then more and more streaked into the sky. Nobody knew the true total at first, but Bayan quickly sensed about 8,000 rockets blazing away. He decided that would be enough, since he could use his other trick, the invisible hand. Giant, ghostly hands of magic sprouted in the air, each one sent to intercept the warheads. Bayan duplicated the power, sending pair after pair of those enormous hands into the sky with one simple instruction. Grab every missile and don't let any get past. Slowly the hands closed around the flying steel, hauling them in, and Bayan gave a second order. Throw every last one into the portal. Almost instantly, the missiles began shifting course midair, each one locking onto a different portal like they had minds of their own. Bayan could practically taste his coming victory, proud of his brilliant plan. Meanwhile, in Moscow, powerful officials gathered in panic after discovering their rivals had unleashed every nuclear weapon in their arsenal. One furious general demanded immediate retaliation, until our protagonist suddenly appeared, calmly saying there was no need for that. The guards didn't bother asking questions. They opened fire on sight, forcing him to repeat that iconic slow-motion bullet-stopping scene from a certain 1999 movie, leaving the soldiers stunned and trembling. Back in the U.S. Command Center, officers were shocked to see the portals vanishing one after another. Bayan popped in there next, casually saying it was his handiwork and thanking them for trusting his brilliantly reckless plan. When the president realized what had done, panic flooded his face, but Bayan quickly explained that the nukes detonated safely inside the rifts, no damage to the real world. The room erupted in cheers, celebrating the arrival of Earth's most unexpected Korean hero. Before leaving, Bayan told everyone they'd now have to handle the monsters that slipped through the rifts, vanishing just as suddenly as had arrived. Back home, his team was still knee-deep in monster-hunting chaos. When Bayan returned, he praised them for doing great work. Layla greeted him with a rare smile, while the Jo-un complained that Shed nearly died a dozen times, and the Jo-un annoyed silence said everything. The sandwich mascot mentioned seeing a huge explosion in the sky and asked if it was his fault, which, of course, Bayan proudly confirmed. While thinking about his team setup, he realized they were missing a proper tank. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the blinding beam of green light forming behind him. It radiated power so intense it could scorch the air. From within that glow appeared a mighty figure, Yudo Renai, the constellation of justice herself, descending to judge Bayan for shaking the balance of the universe. Neither Bayan nor his team was ready for the sight of her breathtakingly dramatic entrance, full of pain and divine fury. But as she stepped forward in full armor with a massive sword in hand, Bayan's eyes lit up. Forget Judgment had just found the perfect tank for his squad. Kianma could already sense the insane power radiating from the woman. It was like standing next to a living nuke. Bayan quickly told her to stay calm and not attack, then opened his system interface, wanting some answers. He asked what exactly the system had told those cosmic beings, and the system casually reminded him that had blocked all messages from them. That's when it hit him. Yeah, Bayan actually did that. Trying to fix things, Bayan approached the armored woman, saying this was just a big misunderstanding. He didn't mean any disrespect. He was just too busy saving the world to chat. But Renai's expression didn't soften. She said that was precisely the issue. Humanity hadn't paid enough for its survival, and it was all his fault. Bayan froze, completely stunned. He asked if Renai was saying the monster rifts and all the deaths were because of her kind. Without hesitation, she nodded, saying it was true, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Then came the explanation that made everyone's blood run cold. Every living thing in the universe gives off energy, and the constellations feed on it to stay alive. They call this energy need entropy. The system wasn't just a guide. It was a farm designed to raise intelligent species like cattle. The smarter they got, the more energy they produced. To get stronger, the constellations throw challenges at different worlds. Some species survive and evolve, producing even more energy for them, while others get wiped out completely and turned into fuel for the stronger ones. But since our protagonist soloed the challenge, humanity didn't get any stronger as a group, and that messed up their system. The constellations wanted to keep an eye on him, but since Bayan blocked them, they panicked. That's why the armored woman showed up herself, to judge him in person. Her entire explanation sounded insane to Bayan, like something straight out of a bad sci-fi movie. He couldn't believe Head wasted his time listening to it. It felt like the author just randomly threw in some space lore for no reason. So he looked at the hamburger man and told him to sum it up in 3 sentences. And for the people who skipped all that nonsense, he broke the 4th wall himself. Basically, the constellations feed on human energy, they make survival games to get stronger, and he messed it all up. Returning to his usual story, Bayan decided these cosmic beings were completely nuts. Layla, furious, said she couldn't forgive people like that, but Kianma stopped her, saying that Renai's power was on a completely different level and jumping in would just get them all killed. Our protagonist activated one of his deadliest techniques, calling upon the power of the void itself and shaping it into a sword. Now fully armed, Bayan faced the woman head-on, making it clear that he absolutely despised constellations. With a single swing, he unleashed a slash so powerful it could erase reality itself. The woman calmly raised her blade to block, easily deflecting the attack like it was a gentle breeze. That left our boy completely stunned. His strongest move, one that erased existence, had just been brushed off like nothing. The woman turned toward him and calmly declared that the so-called transcendent of Earth stood no chance against her. Of course, Bayan refused to accept that. He gathered all his power and activated another move, Planet Destroyer. The beam burst forward, lighting up the sky so intensely it made her face glow, though not enough to move her hair so we could see if she had both eyes. The massive attack shot off into space, leaving a burning trail behind, but the woman didn't have a single scratch. Instead, she actually praised his strength. Our boy started sweating bullets, frantically chaining together different abilities, hoping at least one of them would give him a chance. As his opponent sighed in disappointment, Bayan proudly announced that it was time for an epic action sequence, only to realize a second later that one of his hands was missing. The culprit? Renai's sword, which had sliced it clean off without so much as a warning, and she definitely wasn't planning to give it back. The entire team froze in shock at how effortlessly she overpowered Bayan, while the woman calmly told Bayan to accept her judgment. The pain was excruciating, but he refused to give up. Bayan activated his time reversal skill, rewinding reality itself to restore his hand. He was ready to do it again and again until victory was his. But then came the twist. Renai revealed she was completely immune to time manipulation. Bayan had to quickly stop the trap of the team from launching a suicidal attack on her, realizing they were in way over their heads. It was clear he had no idea what the author was planning anymore, because this fight was pure insanity. The woman was losing patience fast, demanding that he accept her judgment already. Confused, Bayan finally asked what kind of judgment she was talking about. In response, she calmly slid her sword back into its sheath and summoned a glowing golden scale that hovered between them. That, she said, was the scale of justice. Renai explained that she would place different values on each side of a cosmic scale, and the universe itself would decide their weight. But the bored look on the Bayan's face made it clear he couldn't care less about her lecture, so the entity ditched the explanation and chose to demonstrate it directly. The scale would now measure the good he brought to this world and the danger he posed. The issue was that Bayan hadn't listened at all, so he had no idea which side meant what. Not that it mattered. The weights were already set, the judgment already made. And the result was clear. Bayan's existence in this universe was extremely dangerous. Since the scale's verdict was absolute, Renai calmly told Bayan she would restrain him here and now. For a second, Bayan just stared in shock, then a confident grin spread across his face as he asked if this scale could also solve one of humanity's headaches while it was at it. Renai responded that from the universe's viewpoint, humanity's worries were tiny and unimportant, then introduced herself as Yudo Renai. Though to Bayan, she would be known as the Constellation of Justice. That only made Bayan even more excited about what the scale could do. There was no way she could ignore such a request now. Renai calmly asked what kind of values Bayan wanted her to measure, while his teammates started panicking on the side. Bayan waved them off, saying everything was fine and that this was about to get hilarious. A universal judgment game? Bayan wasn't going to miss that. He already knew exactly what to ask. Which would the scale find more entertaining? A plus 99 reinforced wooden stick, or this entire story? The question was so ridiculous that the cosmic being froze on the spot, completely speechless. His whole team mirrored her confusion. Even the guy who had survived the craziest situations so far looked like his brain had short-circuited. It was pure stupidity in question form. Renai still couldn't process what Head said, but Bayan wasn't done. He immediately followed up by asking what would be more fun, a dude swinging an overpowered stick or Korea's most famous necromancer. Yes, he was talking about solo leveling. The girls in his group didn't recognize the reference at all, which horrified him, since those stories were insanely popular. Out of frustration, he looked at the Jo Eun-yi and told her she should sell him her brain, since she clearly wasn't using it for anything useful. Bayan suddenly remembered that one of his abilities could wipe his own memories, and the human hamburger immediately begged the Renai to ignore whatever nonsense he said next, because Bayan was completely addicted to webtoons. Renai sighed and explained that the scale of justice could judge small things like human emotions, just as Head asked, but that was its limit. Hearing that, Bayan confidently declared that she clearly didn't understand this world at all. Here, fun was the highest law, and now he was seriously considering making her a little dumber just to prove his point. The once tense atmosphere had flipped completely into something bizarre and chaotic. Bayan then asked Renai to confirm whether she really maintained the balance of the universe, and she replied yes, reminding him that even a tiny disruption in reality could trigger consequences beyond imagination. That made Bayan pause, because by Renai's logic, he was basically a walking disaster that needed to be eliminated for the sake of balance. Renai tried to soften her words, insisting it wasn't that dramatic, but Bayan had already figured it out. She was the type to justify small sacrifices if it meant protecting the bigger picture. And from Renai's cosmic viewpoint, it probably sounded reasonable, but from a human standpoint, it was wildly unfair and completely messed up. Renai quickly realized she was being pushed into a corner by a boy who argued like a seasoned trickster, someone bold enough to act like he mattered more than the entire universe. But instead of backing down, Bayan calmly told Renai to let the scale decide whether sacrificing him for cosmic order was fair or not. They needed to weigh truth against truth. Renai followed his request, and for a moment the plates sat completely even, until one side suddenly dropped with a heavy thud. Jo Eun-yi girl panicked, unsure what it meant, but Bayan just smiled and told Jo Eun-yi the outcome was exactly what he expected. Renai stood frozen, still gripping the scale, unable to say a word. So Bayan asked Renai straight up if she still planned to restrain someone the universe itself had judged unfairly, especially when she was supposed to be the embodiment of justice. Renai finally admitted Bayan was right, accepting that the situation truly had been unjust. With the threat gone, Layla praised Bayan for being surprisingly sharp, while Jo Eun-yi still had no clue what was happening. He kept it simple for them. Justice changes depending on who's looking at it. Renai seemed completely lost in her own thoughts, so Bayan offered a suggestion. If she was worried about him causing trouble, then she could just watch over him instead. Bayan told Renai he never meant to cause problems, and that it bothered him that higher beings had chosen to attack humanity in the first place. If those higher beings were truly as great as they claimed, then they should have stepped in to help. Renai quietly agreed, admitting that Bayan's idea made perfect sense and promising she would remain by his side from now on. Watching this in shock was Kianma, still trapped, amazed that a cosmic figure had been talked down so easily. Was opening those portals on Earth really a just act? For a moment, Renai said nothing, as if the truth had already been weighing on her. The scales result had been obvious after everything that was said, and Bayan couldn't hide his satisfaction. Renai stayed, deep in thought, looking almost disappointed, and her long sigh made Bayan uneasy. Then, without warning, she shot into the sky as though she had suddenly remembered something urgent. Her ascent was quick, and in seconds she hovered above the planet. With the full reach of her celestial power, Renai began cleansing the earth. Countless monsters still roamed freely, spreading chaos wherever they appeared, but it didn't take long for her power to reach them. People who had already lost hope witnessed a miracle as the once terrifying creatures were swallowed by a strange, radiant energy. A strange light swept across the entire planet as every creature that didn't belong to Earth was wiped out by the power of the constellation of justice, her strength washing over the world like a massive purification. The blazing glow in the sky was both blinding and hopeful, and even Kianma realized that all the demonic energy on Earth had completely disappeared. When Renai returned, Bayan praised her without hesitation, admitting that a constellation's power was on a completely different level. Renai suspected he was manipulating her, but he quickly brushed it off as her overthinking. With Earth safe again, protecting the planet suddenly felt ridiculously easy, and the best part was that he now had a companion who was not only trustworthy, but unimaginably powerful. Renai's beauty was so overwhelming that the entire group froze the moment she removed her armor, claiming she no longer needed it since the battle was over. Bayan could barely look at Renai, so he used his transformation ability to dress her in normal Earth clothes, and once again he was struck by how stunning she looked. Renai didn't understand why she should wear something that offered no protection, and to Bayan's horror, she immediately started taking the clothes off again. Bayan told Renai she absolutely had to stay dressed, no matter what, but for the spirit of justice, that rule made no sense at all. Before Bayan could explain it properly, the system suddenly spoke up, saying there was an issue that needed attention. The other constellations were furious, claiming he had tricked the constellation of justice, which only made Bayan even angrier because he felt humans were the ones being exploited. Bayan decided he would crush those cosmic beings if he had to. Before he could act, the system informed him that the master of the Tower of Trials wanted to meet Bayan in person. Renai added that many constellations believe the tower's master should be blamed for everything, since he was the one who handed out such overwhelming power with no explanation. The system announced it would take Bayan to the dimension of eternal night, and although he agreed, Bayan mentioned he wanted to bring some of his thoughts along, only to be caught off guard when the system immediately prepared to transport him. Bayan complained that he had just gathered a whole group of allies and didn't want to show up alone. Kianma wanted no part in it. The sandwich man just wanted his normal life back, and Yahello was completely confused. That's when Bayan told the system to bring everyone with him, quietly muttering for it to hurry and obey. And when the system confirmed the whole group was being sent, the Zhou Unyi became seriously alarmed. A massive beam of light shot down from the sky and wrapped around the entire group, and in an instant, the street was completely empty. The mortals were hit with the usual nausea and spinning sensations from that kind of teleportation, while Renai glided through it like it was nothing. When the dizzying flash finally faded, they found themselves in a strange new world under a sky crowded with multiple moons. Bayan's friends were pale and confused, unable to figure out where they had landed. Taking in the scenery, the boy guessed they had reached the final floor of the Tower of Trials, and a calm voice echoed out to greet Renai, calling it an honor to receive her. A bizarre figure soon stepped forward and introduced himself as Sugushi Nu Jo, the master of the tower, saying he was pleased by her presence, even if he wasn't thrilled about the humans Shed brought with her. With a body that looked more like a nightmare than a person, he unleashed his overwhelming aura and declared that he would erase those inferior humans from his sacred domain. Zhou Unyi froze in fear, and the human hamburger made a desperate final wish, begging for one last sandwich before he met his end. Meanwhile, Bayan watched everything with an excited grin, saying they had finally reached this moment, their very first fight against the dungeon boss as a complete team. The Tower Master loomed over them like a walking nightmare, and Bayan could barely contain his anticipation, convinced this was going to be fun even if everyone else looked ready to pass out. The girls in the group shook with worry, certain they stood no chance against such a monster. until Bayan tried to calm them down by insisting they could win if they stuck together. That pep talk didn't last long, because the Tower Master suddenly snatched Bayan up in one giant hand and demanded to know how he dared show up without clearing the previous floors. Bayan was already sore from being smacked around by Renai earlier, and getting crushed again was the last thing he wanted. The Tower Master slammed Bayan into the ground and growled that he was sick of being disrespected and would now explain the true issue. According to him, Bayan was clueless, arrogant, sneaky, stubborn, selfish, careless, and rude, but Bayan barely paid attention because the worst part of all was having to sit through that entire lecture while his whole body ached. The Tower Master finished his rant by saying that, above everything else, Bayan was unbelievably selfish, punctuating his words by slamming him with a crushing blow that tore a scream from Bayan's throat. He declared he would make the boy feel every ounce of pain he should have suffered while climbing the tower, promising to make Bayan pay for all his shortcuts. The rest of the team watched in panic as the dungeon boss tightened his grip around Bayan's body. Then, turning to the others, the Tower Master apologized to the remaining lesser beings, but coldly stated that they would have to die as well. That's when a chilling voice cut through the room, declaring that only one person was going to die there, and it would be the Tower Master. From the darkness stepped Kianma, launching a surprise attack that smashed directly into the Tower Master's face, though the monstrous figure barely reacted. Admitting the strike was impressive but pointless, he instantly bound Kianma in chains of magic, drawing a scream of agony as he praised their toughness, saying it was remarkable they could withstand his power despite not being transcendent. Unfortunately, he claimed their suffering was Bayan's fault. With both Bayan and Kianma restrained, the Tower Master turned to the Constellation of Justice and apologized, saying he hadn't wanted her to witness this brutal side of him. Renai then asked whether this was really how he intended to treat the human who had cleared the tower according to the very rules he created. The Tower Master admitted that he, too, served the constellations, and that because he followed the Constellation of Wrath, he was simply carrying out his duty. That was when Bayan realized there was indeed a constellation paying close attention to him, just not in a flattering way. Hearing that excuse, Renai accepted that his reasoning wasn't entirely baseless, while everyone else came to the same grim conclusion. They were absolutely going to die there. But before panic could take over, a voice said otherwise. It was Bayan, exhausted from being tossed around, and his entire body began to shine with a bright blue glow. The sight left the Tower Master stunned, demanding to know how a lowly human had broken free from his control. Our boy casually recalled the insults thrown at him, ignorant and arrogant, and said that in stories like this, it's only normal for the main character to strike back after getting beaten up. Before making a move, Bayan first released his trapped companion, who was just as confused as he was. Bayan reminded Kianma not to forget the terror she had felt moments earlier, because in his logic, if she felt like she was dying, then she definitely wouldn't die, especially if she remembered that ominous red word. Watching Bayan act with that much confidence left Renai even more amazed, since a regular human was now standing up to the Tower Master, as if it were nothing. The creature admitted it had misjudged him, but insisted the others Bayan brought would still perish. When the boss redirected the attack toward his friends, Bayan stopped the blow and called the Tower Master sneaky for targeting them instead of him. Now the creature grew uneasy, unable to understand how the boy's strength had multiplied to such an extreme degree. This was the moment Bayan had been waiting for. He declared had only been using a mere millionth of his actual power, reminding everyone, if they hadn't forgotten, that had once been forced to suppress himself after obliterating that earlier monster. Bayan was absolutely insane with excitement over his own strength, and after getting overwhelmed earlier, had gone and slapped a massive limiter on his real power just to avoid blowing up everything around him. But now that he stood inside a dimension that wasn't part of his world, those restrictions vanished completely, and not even the human hamburger could hide his horror at what was happening. Bayan admitted their opponent was absurdly strong and that there was no way his team should jump into this battle, then unleashed one of his ridiculous abilities straight at the Tower Master, punching through the creature as if his body were nothing more than damn cardboard. The dungeon boss trembled in disbelief, insisting something like that should never be possible, but Bayan simply said the monster's stubbornness ended right here. When the Tower Master turned to the Constellation of Justice in a panic, claiming the boy's power originally came from him, and therefore could never surpass its creator, he didn't even get the chance to finish begging before our reckless troublemaker blasted him again, reminding him that an ancient being with millions of years of experience shouldn't need someone else to fix his disasters. While Bayan reflected on the irony of his own lecture, the Tower Master writhed in pain, clutching the empty space where one of his arms used to be, shouting that he couldn't vanish because losing him would throw the entire dimension into turmoil and threaten the balance of the universe itself. Bayan's sharp choice of words clearly rattled the Constellation of Justice, But even with her discomfort hanging in the air, he casually sliced the Tower Master clean in half, delivering a divine-level pain the creature couldn't even comprehend. Its last attempt at a threat sounded more like a joke, and Bayan didn't bother taking it seriously as the creature's body crumbled away like fading dust. Renai then realized she hadn't even seen the attack happen, and, even worse, that a human had just taken down a cosmic being. Bayan apologized to his team right after, admitting that they probably worried themselves sick over him. Everyone wanted to go back to Earth, and a few were desperate to return to their original bodies. In the middle of their chat, Bayan suddenly remembered he could have delivered a cooler, more self-centered one-liner after beating the monster, and the fact that he missed that chance tore him up inside, leaving his teammates visibly disappointed. Then his attention was pulled to the glowing system window in front of him. Defeating the Tower Master had started his ascension, placing him in Stage 1, and Bayan immediately wondered how many stages existed and how useful they might be in future fights. That was when Renai asked if the deviant understood what he had done, because now every other constellation in the universe considered him their enemy. Bayan replied to her with another question, explaining that he had no other option and would have died if he hadn't fought back, then asked if Renai truly preferred that outcome. Bayan added that not every constellation hated him, since he had supposedly gained a strong supporter, but Renai quickly reminded him she never claimed such a thing. Thinking back to the Tower Master's final warning, he requested to be sent to the constellation of Wrath, and Renai immediately questioned if he planned on fighting her, calling the idea insane. Bayan insisted he wanted to talk things out instead, which oddly seemed to please Renai, while Jo-eun beside her just assumed Bayan was a clueless fool. The human hamburger took the chance to hype up Bayan's accomplishments, suggesting they all head back to Earth and party until the world ends. Before anyone could reply, a bright golden magic circle suddenly lit up beneath their feet. The group was instantly swallowed by a blinding pillar of light, and before they could even scream properly, they were dumped into another blistering hot dimension, though Bayan stood there unfazed thanks to his full power. They found themselves in the realm of Huja Karuna, the constellation of Wrath, a place that felt like the inside of a furious volcano where even the hamburger guy's cheese was melting off. Jo-eun still couldn't understand why they kept getting dragged into these insane situations, and Bayan simply said he fought better with his buddies nearby. Though coming from someone so shamelessly self-centered, believing that was tough, except for Layla, who accepted every word like gospel. Then a dark, chilling laugh echoed throughout the molten cavern, prompting the constellation of Justice to summon her armor, shield, and sword as a violent gust of murderous energy tore through the area. Huja Karuna finally appeared, furious at seeing humans in his territory and unleashing an overwhelming force that shattered the ground beneath them. His armored, middle-aged form struck with terrifying might, and when he slammed into the constellation of Justice while calling her an idiot, Renai was forced to block with all her strength for the first time, clearly recognizing his incredible power. He casually remarked that it had been ages since their last meeting, right before a fist exploded against his face. It was the protagonist, fed up and ready to throw hands with anyone who touched his friends, leaving his entire team stunned yet again by the sheer ridiculousness of the scale their lives had reached. The team still couldn't believe what they were seeing, and Renai sharply reminded the boy that he was supposed to solve this peacefully, not throw punches the first chance he got, but it honestly looked like he had been waiting all along for an excuse to use violence. Bayan flung the constellation of Wrath body across the area, smashing him into the rocky wall, and now that his power was completely unsealed, he didn't think these cosmic beings were much of a threat at all. Renai, clearly alarmed, demanded to know what he thought he was doing, and Bayan insisted he was actually protecting her. Renai then pointed out that Karuna was the type who couldn't control his own temper and always relied on brute force to fix every problem. She explained that the dimension originally given to Karuna used to be a gorgeous world, beautiful enough to make anyone stop and admire it. But since Karuna discovered it late in his existence, he ended up furious, and that rage slowly twisted the land until nothing was left of its beauty. After destroying everything, the man only got angrier because deep down he knew this was always how he acted. And realizing this, Bayan concluded that the constellation of Wrath was simply a foolish man who couldn't handle his own emotions. Hearing such an insult from a human pushed Karuna over the edge, and now he was raging even harder because someone so insignificant had dared to strike him in the face. The heat pouring from Karuna's hands was so intense that the stone beneath them started to melt, and that was when Renai realized they were in real danger. This entire fiery dimension was tied to Karuna himself, and if his rage burst out of control, the volcano around them would erupt, unleashing lava made from a terrifying substance. Bayan immediately understood how disastrous that would be and tried to cool the furious man down by using an ability that dropped everything to absolute zero, freezing the constellation of Wrath solid. But it didn't matter, since Karuna broke free of the ice like it was nothing. Renai warned that Karuna was literally the embodiment of anger, meaning they had no real way to restrain him, but Bayan was more frustrated with her long explanations than with the threat itself. Jumping right back into combat, Bayan caught Karuna a powerful swing with just one hand, realizing this constellation was on a completely different level, far stronger than the Tower Master ever was. Karuna said he enjoyed the strange coldness he had felt, something completely new to him, and the unfamiliar sensation only made his fury burn hotter. Not understanding what the man was ranting about, Bayan used an empathy skill to look into the emotions of the living embodiment of wrath. Little by little, the man felt something shifting inside his mind, and although Renai warned that this could be dangerous, Bayan calmly assured her he was only trying to ease Karuna's rage by linking their emotions. But the embodiment of wrath, shocked that anyone had entered his mind, admitted it felt strangely pleasant while also making him even more unstable. Renai watched with growing concern, insisting Bayan would be consumed by fury, but the ability didn't work as intended, leaving the constellation looking like a mindless berserker, as if something had snapped, prompting our protagonist to apologize for ignoring his earlier warnings and for throwing the first punch, asking if they could settle things peacefully, only for a massive fist to swing at him as wrath called him a failure, which deeply insulted Bayan, and after being grabbed by the neck, he heard the furious constellation say his nigentropy value was too low and that humanity was meant to be wiped out until he ruined everything, leading Renai to step in and demand confirmation that the dimensional gates were meant to exterminate humans, something the enraged man admitted without hesitation, pushing Bayan to his limit as he grew tired of all the talking and finally awakened the first stage of his ascension, releasing a massive blast of energy that caught the furious constellation completely off guard. The attack Bayan unleashed could wipe out a planet, and it worked frighteningly well. Universal laws, constellations, none of that meant anything to Bayan, because he had already chosen to become the most overpowered main character in every webtoon ever made. The rage-filled man who couldn't control his own emotions was now floating through space, confused about how such a tiny bug carried power strong enough to challenge someone with over 10 stars. Bayan then noticed his hair and eyes had changed color, realizing it must be the influence of the first stage. While he was distracted by that discovery, the constellation of wrath shot back toward the battlefield like a screaming missile, furious enough to crack the sky. He was desperate to crush Bayan, who was only irritated by how many exclamation marks that side character kept shouting at him. Tired of all the dramatic noise, Bayan blocked the charging attack with a punch of his own. The furious constellation had to brace himself, realizing his previous ultimate strike had burned up all his power and still achieved nothing. Meanwhile, Bayan was getting slightly annoyed, ready to keep swinging, because what truly frustrated him more than any threat were those endless exclamation points. And now, Bayan decided it was finally time to end this chaotic mess. Bayan slammed into the constellation of wrath with all his strength, reminding him that battles were supposed to be fun. And just like that, the cosmic being collapsed in defeat. Renai, who had been watching from the sidelines, could only stare in shock, realizing that a human beating a constellation could throw the entire universe's balance into chaos. After falling, the wrathful entity suddenly burst into wild laughter, standing back up with renewed energy and admitting he'd enjoyed every second of the fight, claiming he wished the boy had appeared much earlier. That's when Bayan understood the boss had entered Phase 2. Evil laughter never meant anything good, and the entity casually revealed that Bayan's friends were already dead. Hearing this, Bayan turned around in panic, seeing the overwhelming heat swallowing them, and that the trap was close to triggering something catastrophic. Hopefully, she would stop it in time. Renai warned that the more enraged the man became, the hotter everything around him burned. Noticing their distraction, Karuna told Renai not to worry about insects because they would vanish soon anyway, but that single line lit a furious fire inside Bayan's heart. Karuna believed that humanity was already doomed, claiming the plan had been set in motion long ago and that the rage virus had already spread across the entire planet. Hearing this made Bayan truly panic for the first time in the fight, while the constellation of wrath kept talking, insisting that every creature on Earth was probably infected and had already fallen under Magnus' control, turning on each other without hesitation. Renai stayed busy healing the injured, doing everything she could while the situation kept escalating. That was when Bayan finally snapped, his speech bubble bursting with exclamation marks as their clash grew hotter and louder by the second, and Renai warned that the volcano was close to erupting. She quickly activated one of her teleportation spells, insisting they escape immediately, and the boy's body was pulled into the transfer spell, stopping his punch from reaching the constellation of wrath as everyone was ripped out of that collapsing dimension. A heartbeat later, The entire area erupted in a massive explosion, but his team was already being sent back to Earth. Even so, Bayan couldn't stop thinking about the danger waiting for them, and he knew they had to defend their world. Renai stood in silence, overwhelmed by a new realization. She had never known the portals on Earth were created to erase humanity, and there was nothing just about such a cruel plan. The teleportation light flashed across the sky, and Bayan's team finally returned to Earth in one piece, where he quickly began healing everyone while checking if they were all right, apologizing for the chaos that unfolded because of him, completely unaware that someone was creeping up behind him. When he turned, a man lunged at him with wild, animal-like fury, forcing him to dodge a vicious bite, proving that the rat's warning hadn't been a bluff, because the people who stayed on Earth had fallen into a mindless rage, turning countless innocents into frenzied attackers, marking the first trial set by the constellation of Wrath, essentially the start of the zombie apocalypse, raising the question of what humanity becomes when intelligence fades and culture collapses. Because without reason or identity, calling them human no longer made sense. And so these creatures were now nothing more than zombies created by the rage virus. This whole explanation came from the hamburger guy, who asked if everyone understood the situation, though the girls were still too shocked to form a single word. Jo Eun-yi had wandered a bit too far from the group and was immediately swarmed by several infected. But Bayan rushed in to rescue her, refusing to let the virus claim another one of his allies. Calling down crackling electricity, he blasted every infected attacker, making their raging bodies shake from a whole new kind of agony. And once the fight ended, he realized the thrill of wiping them out felt strangely satisfying. Turning back with an exaggerated heroic pose, Bayan asked Jo Eun-yi if she was all right. But instead of gratitude, she stood there with tears streaming down her face, demanding to know if he thought everyone's lives were some kind of joke. As she stormed toward him, Bayan muttered that she was starting to complain again, only to get smacked across the face so hard even he froze in confusion. Jo Eun-yi shouted that he must be losing his mind, because ever since all of this chaos began, they had come close to dying again and again because of him. Bayan responded that he had saved them every single time, but Jo Eun-yi screamed that they never should have been dragged into any of this, recalling how she had been trapped in that unbearable heat, crying nonstop because she didn't want to die without seeing her parents one last time, insisting Bayan had no idea how horrifying that moment truly was and that she never wanted to feel something like that again. Jo Eun-yi yelled that everything was happening because of his ridiculous idea of fun, telling him to go deal with his mess alone, since in the end all of them were just props for Bayan to show off, and he always ran off on his own anyway. Jo Eun-yi asked if Bayan even understood what a companion was supposed to be, because all he ever did was throw punches, and she hated that he called that fun. Bayan replied that this was just how stories usually worked, but she snapped, saying that made no sense at all. If these people were infected by some kind of virus, then there had to be a way to cure them. At this point, Jo Eun-yi was practically begging Bayan to save everyone. I didn't get it at first. I thought Jo Eun-yi was furious about the whole adventure, but in the end she actually wanted to help the zombies. Moving on, Bayan finally explained himself. He couldn't believe Jo Eun-yi thought he had killed those people. He insisted she was misunderstanding everything, saying he had only stunned them with electricity. They were all still alive, and like she said, there had to be a cure. Bayan also didn't like heroes who destroy everything they see and get bashed for repeating the same mistakes. Every time he mentioned stuff like that, his team stared at him in confusion, which made sense since they couldn't break the fourth wall. Bayan told Jo Eun-yi not to stress, promising he wouldn't go overboard, but before he could finish, Jo Eun-yi warned him about another infected rushing in. When he finally turned around, the creature had already bitten into his shoulder. Jo Eun-yi screamed in fear as Bayan cried out in pain, completely confused by what was happening, and one of his emergency abilities suddenly activated on its own, shooting out countless restraints that wrapped around the infected like sticky webs, finally pinning the creature down, and only then did Bayan realize how close he had been to real danger. Since he had been bitten, Jo Eun-yi panicked and thought he might already be infected, but Bayan insisted it was nothing to worry about because one of his many skills, called Splendid Healing, should easily fix it, yet instead of getting better, the wound only grew worse, forcing him to try a blessing ability. But even that failed, and Renai explained the harsh truth that the virus was made from celestial power, meaning he had no way to counter it. And with no other option left, she said she needed to cut off his head before the infection consumed him completely. Terrified by her words, Bayan suddenly noticed anger boiling inside him. And with the small amount of control he still had, he tried to signal Renai not to strike, desperately clinging to the idea that everything would make sense because he was the main character, thinking that the story had to start off badly to balance out how strong he was. And as Bayan convinced himself of this strange logic, he finally lost his mind entirely, releasing a furious scream that echoed through the entire area, shaking everyone nearby. And just as Renai was about to take action with deep regret in her eyes, Kianma intervened and stopped her from attacking. Kianma needs to return to normal someday, which is why Bayan has to stay alive, and even the hamburger agreed with that. While Renai hesitated as more zombies closed in until she finally ordered everyone to clear the way so she could draw her sword, only for the trap to immediately ask if she was trying to start a fight. And Zhou Enyi, being the only sensible one, reminded them they didn't have time for pointless arguments and needed to get somewhere safe before things got even worse. The hamburger admitted he had no idea how to escape the crowd, but Zhou Enyi suggested that Renai teleport them, since there might still be one untouched place left, and although most of the region was overrun, the school nearby looked abandoned, so they decided to take Bayan there, giving Kianma room to work when she realized he was in some sort of demonic frenzy, hoping she could calm him down with acupuncture. But the moment she started sticking needles into him, Bayan suddenly threw up a huge amount of blood, shocking everyone, and the hamburger complained that the treatment clearly didn't work, while Renai insisted that celestial powers couldn't be suppressed so easily, until Bayan suddenly lifted his head and said he felt amazing, the crushing pressure inside his skull finally gone. Renai stood frozen after witnessing everything, while Kianma laughed proudly at her own success. And although Bayan managed to calm down for a few seconds, the fury inside him began rising again, and nothing annoyed him more than being tied up like a helpless lead character who couldn't use his own skills. So Bayan shut his eyes and focused as hard as he could, trying to figure out what kind of plot twist the author was aiming for until, suddenly, a wild idea struck him. He claimed he finally understood how to beat the problem of this chapter, even insisting that he was definitely going to die in the next one, which officially marked the start of Chapter 11, leaving everyone wondering if he'd really survive. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, a small group was desperately defending themselves from the infected, and one girl was screaming in frustration because their group had promised to stick together. Yet one of them now had to stay behind after revealing he'd already been infected earlier, and before they left, he apologized for acting carelessly, wishing the others a safe escape as their boat drifted away, breaking the girl's heart even more. All of this turned out to be footage playing on a phone, because it was actually a drama episode that had just ended, and our protagonist was the one watching it, saying the sacrifice was predictable but still touching, then deciding to give a perfect rating along with a glowing comment, proudly claiming that stories with an author's personal worldview were far more meaningful than anything taught in school. Bayan slurped his instant noodles while thinking about what he had just watched, then snapped back to reality inside his restraints, declaring that before he transformed, Bayan would gladly give up his life for everyone else. Zhou Enyi stared at him, confused, while Renai didn't even understand what self-sacrifice meant. Bayan stubbornly repeated that this was simply the fate of any main character, but Yahello just frowned, asking what Bayan was even planning to sacrifice for, since all of them were absurdly strong and clearly didn't need him to handle every situation. Suddenly unsure of his own speech, Bayan froze, and Zhou Enyi quickly pointed out he was about to start dragging things out again. She reminded him they weren't helpless side characters and could deal with the crisis without him throwing himself into danger. That was when Bayan finally understood this wasn't a dramatic death scene or a heroic transformation moment, especially because his group was so powerful that even the infected avoided them. With the entire population already affected, there wasn't even the excitement of meeting surviving humans, and the group also agreed they shouldn't kill any infected person. Trying to piece together what the point of this chapter was before Bayan lost control again, everyone suddenly heard a horrible noise, only to realize it was the Yahello's stomach growling, and Kianma calmly remarked she was just starving. Zhou Enyi immediately admitted she was also hungry, despite how chaotic everything around them was. Everyone suddenly stared at the hamburger guy lying on the table, and he panicked instantly, begging them not to even think about eating him. But Kianma insisted that emergency food should nobly give itself up for the team, something he absolutely refused to accept. Desperate to survive, the human hamburger told them to follow him. And just outside the room, Kianma admitted he had a point. There were dozens of packaged hamburgers scattered across the floor, more than enough to feed everyone. That stash had been placed there earlier by Bayan, and Zhou Enyi asked how to even eat them. So she was shown how to tear open the wrapper and was shocked by the amount of food lying around. Yahello hesitated, asking the hamburger if it was okay to eat his friends, which deeply offended him, since he was an actual person and not related to any of the packaged snacks. Ignoring the apocalypse situation entirely, the group decided to sit down and eat, with Layla tasting a sandwich for the first time and Kianma approaching it like someone from rural China discovering fast food, both amazed by the mix of flavors. While the others enjoyed their meal, Renai quietly checked on Bayan, asking how he felt, and he thanked her for tying him to the chair so he wouldn't lose control again. She apologized, saying it was her fault for dragging him into that other dimension, because now the wrath inside Bayan would torture him for the rest of his life. Feeling a burning pain spreading through his whole body, Bayan asked her what on earth he was supposed to do now. Renai insisted she wouldn't let him stay in that condition, saying that the suffering humans were going through because of the constellations was unfair, and she wanted to handle things the proper way, which gave Bayan a bit of hope even through the pain. She told him to hold on a little longer, certain they could fix this since they had dependable allies. Just then, the girls walked into the room cheerful and satisfied after eating, their good mood almost glowing, which confused both Bayan and Renai, and that confusion only made the boy even angrier. Seeing his teammates smiling made something inside Bayan snap again, and he burst into another rage fit, forcing Renai to struggle to keep him tied to the chair, though it barely seemed to help. Kianma remarked that Renai needed her original form back, saying her powers have been unstable ever since her transformation, making it hard for her to control her inner energy. As she focused, she suddenly sensed something unusual, an energy close by that didn't belong to someone infected by rage, and considering how the world currently was, that discovery was unbelievable. Renai immediately rejected the idea, saying the virus had reached every living creature and that her own senses never failed, but Kianma confidently disagreed, fully trusting her own intuition. She said she could pinpoint exactly where that unaffected person was and insisted that if Renai listened carefully, she would hear their breathing. Renai tried it, and to her shock, she actually detected the presence of a completely normal human being. Layla wondered if someone else had survived, but Jouni quickly reminded her that the infected were technically alive too, just not in a normal state. Renai sensed the unknown person getting even closer, but couldn't make sense of it, and Layla insisted they act fast because whoever it was might be in danger. Meanwhile, right in front of them, our boy lost control again, letting out a deafening roar, and Renai warned that Bayan's power was reaching a level comparable to a cosmic disaster, meaning they had to hurry or Bayan would lose himself completely and wipe out the planet. Renai chose to stay behind and hold Bayan in the chair while the rest of the group went to handle the situation alone. Kianma jumped out the window with a hamburger tucked in her arms as she raced toward the mysterious person, while Jouni and Layla remained unsure about letting her go without any plan. To their surprise, Kianma had far more skills than they expected, walking through the air like she was climbing invisible steps. The hamburger didn't understand why he had been taken along, but Kianma explained she brought him because he knew Earth well and was easy to carry, which unexpectedly warmed his heart, since someone finally needed him. Kianma landed on the ground once they got close to the building, feeling a calm presence inside that amazed the hamburger, though he immediately worried about one thing. Would that peaceful person even dare open the door, now that the world had fallen apart and infected people were closing in on them? The trap had broken into the apartment without hesitation, slipping past the infected and smashing the window as if it were nothing, insisting she sensed a calm, untainted presence inside. While the hamburger nervously questioned whether anyone would open the door in a world overrun by rage-filled zombies, only for the trap to shove her way in anyway. Inside, the apartment looked empty at first, though Kianma insisted someone was behind a bedroom door, calmly breathing. And when they entered, they found the place filled with posters and merchandise from various webtoons, making the hamburger panic as he realized they had stepped into the home of a hardcore fan. Kianma, thinking the talismans and decorations were strange, prepared an attack. But the hamburger asked her to wait, right before the girl under the blanket sat up on her own, revealing herself to be completely normal, instantly stunning the hamburger with her beauty, to the point that Kianma tossed him aside in embarrassment while the newly awakened girl simply stared at them, trying to figure out what in the world was happening. A talking hamburger and a martial artist showing up in her room felt so unreal that the gorgeous woman named Nara froze, convinced she had stumbled into a manga scene. Her reaction was so bizarre that both Kianma and the newly introduced Kim Il-jin, though he would forever remain Hamburger Man in my mind, were left completely speechless. The strangest part was that the girl looked almost identical to the deviant Bayan himself, and she casually mentioned that she had just finished reading a chapter where he should have died, only to discover he was still alive. Completely done with the situation, Kiyama asked the hamburger if everyone in this country behaved like this, while Nara blinked slowly, trying to understand why a fighter and a talking sandwich were standing in front of her. Introducing herself as Nara, though everyone called her Nara, she said she must be dreaming, especially since the sight of a living hamburger made no sense. The hamburger quickly realized she was a student from the same school, which shocked her. And when Kiyama asked how they knew each other, he explained that Nara was well known on campus for a very specific reason. Before everything went wrong, Nara had been that legendary student who slept through every class, but still managed to get perfect scores, earning the title of the school's champion sleeper. The hamburger grew irritated remembering all of this, frustrated that she had literally slept through the apocalypse and missed every single event. Nara simply replied that she adored sleeping more than anything else, and besides, it was a holiday that day, which explained why the school had been completely empty when they arrived. A horde of zombies roaming outside meant nothing to Kiyama, but what truly shocked her was that Nara had slept through the entire apocalypse, which left even the hamburger stunned as he realized she wasn't skipping school. She had simply been napping through doomsday. Kiyama, overwhelmed by how absurd everything sounded, grew even more irritated when Nara casually admitted she loved sleeping and assumed it was all a dream anyway. Without wasting another second, Kiyama scooped her up like luggage and leapt out the window, racing back toward the school while Nara screamed for help, completely convinced she was trapped in some bizarre nightmare. A mysterious figure watched their escape with great interest as they sped through the air. When they arrived, Jo Eun peeked through the window and noticed Kiyama had already returned. Bursting into the room, Kiyama announced she had secured the only uninfected person left and had explained everything to her along the way. Nara clutched her racing heart, stunned to see that everyone inside looked like they'd stepped straight out of a fantasy series. Jo Eun recognized her immediately as the school's legendary sleepyhead, while Yahello pointed out that the deviant's condition had worsened. Renai, exhausted but determined, continued restraining him with the last of her strength. Hearing them say he might need to be sacrificed made her uneasy, and when the hamburger asked if she knew him, Nara quietly confirmed it. She said they used to be close when they were young, even if he probably didn't remember, and that he was the one who first introduced her to comics. Still convinced she was dreaming, Nara acted far too relaxed for the situation, which only made Jo Eun and Yahello exchange confused looks. Renai, curious, wanted to know why the virus hadn't affected Nara at all. The girl quickly guessed that this must be the famous Renai Shed heard mentioned on the way here, which impressed the hamburger. Her brain worked surprisingly fast for someone who had just woken up. Nara then said she had figured everything out. This entire scenario was her own dream, which everyone else insisted was absolutely wrong. Jo Eun assumed Nara was just overwhelmed, but Nara doubled down, saying she now knew for sure it was a dream because her crush had appeared in it. Obviously, this fantasy world was created so the two of them could finally be together. And honestly, even Yahello couldn't argue with her logic. The timing really did feel like something out of a romance comic. The warriors still couldn't believe the depraved one actually had a fan, but her disbelief turned into worry the moment she saw Nara clinging to him without hesitation. Nara ignored the warrior completely and wrapped her arms around the enraged boy, trying to calm him down as she begged him to remember who she was. Justice shouted that she was being reckless and had no idea how dangerous this was, insisting it wouldn't work, but Nara didn't listen for even a second. Instead, she pressed her fingers into her own eyes just to force herself to cry, hoping the tears would help convince him. The warrior witnessed that and instantly decided the sleepy girl was just as unhinged as the boy she was hugging. As Nara's tears streamed down her cheeks, one drop fell onto the protagonist's forehead like a tiny splash of rain, triggering a reaction so strange that Justice couldn't believe what she was seeing. Even Kiyama was stunned, unable to understand how this was possible, and the hamburger felt like he had seen a moment exactly like this somewhere before. Against every expectation, Bayan, who had been completely consumed by rage, started calming down at last, slowly lifting his head as if waking from a long nightmare. In that instant, all of the fury inside him vanished, leaving him fully conscious again. Nara told everyone that this was the true method to bring any wild male lead back to normal. A warm hug and the honest tears of someone who shared a piece of his past. The depraved Bayan stared at her, trying to figure out what had just happened, which made Nara blush deeply. She became so shy she could barely say a word. Our boy recognized her as the sleepy student, but hadn't noticed her awkward outfit until now. Her sudden change confused Yahello. Actually, she seemed a little jealous. Renai came closer and told Bayan that Nara was the one who healed him, and he was very curious about how it happened. Bayan wanted to understand how an ordinary girl could cure him without any cosmic powers. He only remembered the part about the tears and their childhood friendship. For it to work, Nara had to like him and play the role of the female lead. Seeing him jump to these strange conclusions, the team realized he was back to normal. Still, Bayan felt thankful for everything, and, guessing Nara might be cold, put his jacket over her. Nara still thought it was all a dream and couldn't look him in the eyes. Then Bayan invited her to join their team, saying they needed someone smart like her, and he felt she'd be very useful. Renai, however, was truly worried because Nara had stopped the constellation's power. She might be more dangerous than the Bayan. Now, they could get back to the main problem. Nara said this dream felt way too real. Nara thought she must have watched too many movies before falling asleep. But Jo Eun-yi reminded her again that everything was real and the fate of the world was on the line. Finally, it seemed like Nara understood the seriousness of the situation. Bayan wanted to head back to the constellation's dimension, but Renai warned that rushing back without a plan could lead to disaster. Bayan wasn't sure what to do. They hadn't faced anyone they couldn't beat yet. That's when Nara asked them to explain everything, since she had no clue what was going on. This gave Bayan an idea. Since Nara was smart, he decided to tell her the full story, hoping she could help come up with a plan. After a few minutes of explaining, the group returned to the constellation's realm. The angry man was waiting for them, impressed they had the guts to come back, and noticed their group had grown. Bayan said that thanks to this enemy, had already faced enough frustration in life. He was done with it. His calm confidence only made the enemy more furious. Lost in rage, the constellation charged at him with a powerful strike aimed straight at his face. But Bayan didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly as the blow came. A huge shockwave spread across the whole dimension. Hiyama quickly raised a barrier to protect everyone, and for the first time, the enemy's eyes showed real interest. The constellation strike hit a strong shield and couldn't touch the depraved one. Renai was the one protecting the boy, standing between them. Then Bayan warned that things were about to get more intense, making the constellation of Wrath furious again. Seeing Renai step in, the Herald of Wrath questioned why she was interfering, calling her actions weak for using insects to fight an auxiliary constellation. Renai quickly explained she was there to protect the boy, but the constellation couldn't understand and only grew angrier, launching more attacks at our protagonist. Thanks to Renai's defense, Bayan thought he might actually have a chance against the constellation, who seemed to enjoy the fight. Before striking again, Bayan started gathering energy in the pendant around his neck. Our boy realized this was the signal for a second phase. It had happened before, and last time Bayan got seriously beaten, the Herald of Wrath doubted the boy could really match a constellation's power.